This recording is concerned with Plato, in particular, the allegory of the cave. Now, the allegory of the cave is a famous piece of literature, but also a bit of a strange one. My notes should assist you considerably in understanding what Plato was getting at. And some of these ideas are quite deep. Here, I want to talk about two distinct issues that aren't really taken up thoroughly in my notes. This idea of the forms is very disconcerting for students. The idea of the intelligible realm as opposed to the visible realm is something that many, I believe, find quite confusing. But the basic idea of it is simply this. Philosophy, according to Plato, should be concerned with general knowledge, things that are permanent, stable, and unchanging. Yet everything we observe in the world is in a state of flux and change. So we need to learn to think with our minds and not with our senses if we are going to grasp the true nature of reality. The senses could only disclose to us the world of appearance, the world of the changeable. The mind is required to understand the intelligible realm, the realm of things that are permanent, stable, unchanging. Now let's try to illustrate this with a very simple example. As I hold these up, you can see two pens and you can see two other pens. Now, all of you know it's very simple arithmetic. If you add 2 plus 2, it equals 4. Now, you may believe that you can actually see 2 plus 2 equals 4. After all, if I had a chalkboard behind me, I could write down 2 plus 2 equals 4, and you may think that that is the actual mathematical relation. But reflect an instant. Whether I'm holding up two pens and saying that they're equal to 4, or rather I'm simply noting it on the board or writing the mathematical equation, you're not really seeing the mathematical equation itself, are you? The mathematical equation itself is permanent and stable. It can be represented by adding together pens, as I've just shown here, or it can be represented on the board, or it can be represented in a binomial, be represented by binomial mathematics, as we do in computing. It can be represented in any number of ways, or basically an unlimited number of ways. That being the case, that means we really don't see 2 plus 2 equals 4. We have things that, if we reflect, remind us of it, and to grasp the real relation, we have to think strictly with the mind. This is also behind the geometrical point. The geometry talks about objects that you cannot really see. No circle is perfect and things like this. Yet, the circles that we draw are close enough that they remind us of, remember the Meno, they remind us of the true nature of the circle, and the mathematical truths discussed in geometry deal with that object. Now, another way that Plato talks about the forms independently from the Republic is found in a different dialogue, the Timaeus. And I want to say a few words about how he presents the forms in the Timaeus. Students sometimes find this to be quite insightful. In the Timaeus, Plato holds that there are three co-eternal principles. Namely, there is matter, there's a demiurge, a type of creating God, but not a standard God, but one that just is a sort of creative presence. And there are the forms. Now, in this mythic presentation of how the world came into existence, Plato understands this in a mythical way. He's very explicit about this. Essentially, the demiurge takes matter and he takes the forms and he tries to establish matter in accord with his model, which is the forms. But matter is obtuse, it's resistant. It doesn't allow itself to be shaped as the demiurge would wish to do it. So instead of fully imitating the forms, it merely resembles the forms. So anything that we see with our senses, anything in the visible realm, has kind of a resemblance to the forms, but should not be confused with it, because the demiurge was not able to make matter fully correspond to the ideal form. For the life of me, when I read the Timaeus, I have the impression that the forms are something like blueprints, and they may not be a bad model to understand. When you build a house, the blueprint is one thing. The actual wood that you are working with is quite another, and the final house only approximates the blueprint to a greater or lesser extent, but it never is exactly as it was foreseen. Things are simply a little bit more delicate and more difficult to work with than that. I hope you enjoyed this, reading The Allegory of the Cave. It is very famous, and it bears keeping in mind. It has had a huge influence over Western culture.